Good evening, everyone. We are now in chapter 27 of the book of Isaiah. And again, I like to remind us each time when we look at this book, the chapters that we have been going through, they are all prophecies. And in the way that prophecies are written, you find that they are not in a chronological order. The second thing that we need to pay attention to this part of the book of Isaiah is that beyond the chronology, it is also written in a poetic language. Now, the Hebrew poetic language is really trying to help us understand the message from the imagery that is being presented. Now, doesn't mean that the items that is being discussed are not real or concrete, but the imagery is the important message. Oriental messaging comes from presenting the imagery in the mind, not only in the words. And in so doing, as we read, say, chapter 27, we will try to understand the imagery driven from some concrete elements as being discussed. And so let's begin. It says, in that day, every time you see such words in that day, we are really talking about sometime in the future. And many a times it's a day of redemption. Now, what does it mean, the day of redemption? The day when the period of time when God brings the nation of Israel back together into the land, and they function as one nation. The final war of Gog and Magog, which is in Ezekiel 38 and 39, comes to an end. God punishes the nations and draws them together. No, all of that is with regards to the future. So it really depends on which aspect of the future, with regards to Israel, would the prophecy be talking about? At the time when Isaiah is given these prophecies, it has not yet happened. And so, from our standpoint, we're still talking about sometime in the future. Now, it begins this way: Jehovah, with his severe sword, great, strong. Now, this is about sword. Every time you read the word sword or dagger, it's about a war. It's about a fight. And with this, it leads to destruction, some form of a killing, because it's an instrument of a war. And it says here, uh, the 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 sword itself is severe. It is hard. It is something which will will make life difficult. It is great. It is in a way, it can do great things. It can, in terms of magnitude, it is strong. It is strong in the sense that it is powerful. It is mighty. These three descriptions of the sword of God brings us the imagery that it is a sword that no one can avoid. No one can fight. No one can defend. And so God says he's going to use the sword and will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, that twisted serpent. And God will slay the reptile that is in the sea. Let us break this down a little bit. So you see that God is going to use it upon the Leviathan. Now, this word punish uh, is seen as God placing a judgment. But we're talking about Leviathan. Leviathan is a great animal. We read this in Job 41. It is seen as a fleeing serpent. What do you mean, a fleeing serpent? This serpent is, well, I guess you can say it is, well, I guess you could see it as a something that is running away. I think, a fleeing serpent running away. Now, this word serpent is regarding a reptile. It's nahash. It is called a serpent. You can think of it as a snake. So it is a snake-like creature. And the book of Job in chapter 41 gives a very graphic description called the Leviathan. First, the Behemoth, and then the Leviathan. And so God is saying he will place judgment on the Leviathan. It is the snake-like creature that is running away. It is the Leviathan that is the twisted serpent. Now, twisted here, uh, I guess you can see it as a crooked serpent. I think that would be a way of understanding it. Bent, twisted, crooked. These are all just descriptions. So it is a twisted serpent, a bent serpent. So both of these is describing some form of a character. And God uses the Leviathan as a symbol that he is going to punish the Leviathan. It is trying to run away. It is a mighty snake-like creature. And God says he will harak, he will intentionally kill. Now, this word reptile is the word tanin. Tanin. You find this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 21. I think you can find that in verse 21. This is on day 5. The great sea creature. These are great sea creature. Or if you like, sea monster. So the Leviathan is one of those sea monsters. It is not a reptile, it is a tanim. And so it's a great sea monster that's in the sea. The character is what we are looking at. So God is not saying, well, in the day to come, I'm going to kill an animal. God is using this particular animal that is fearsome, it's great, it's big, it can run away. When you run away, we're talking about in the water. It twists around. And so the twisted serpent means it's a serpent that can twist around. Maybe if you imagine this as the Chinese dragon, in a big way, that could be a picture of it, but in the sea. Now, however, our purpose in verse 1 is to look at the character. God is going to punish it. It is a great big serpent. When it is being attacked, it tries to run away. It twists around so that no one can catch it. But God says he will slay. This is what harak is, intentionally kill. It's, well, when it's applied to humans, right? Thou shalt not murder. Now, that's the word. It's the same word. And God says he's going to kill this animal that is in the sea. Basically, the picture that we are given in verse 1 is that God is going to tackle the great big monster that no one dares to handle. and you can't handle such monsters. You can't handle, uh, and I guess it is a symbol of all the nations that will come against Israel in that day, the day of redemption, the day of Gog and Magog. And Israel certainly cannot go against them. So it's the nations that came together to attack Israel is now typified as the imagery of the Leviathan, the great, big, fearsome, fast twisting sea monster. And the message is God will kill it. Period. You can't get into the sea, God will kill it either, right? No problems with that. And so we are talking about that final redemption when Israel is at a loss and yet God will come to save her. Now, in that day, again, that day, sing to her. Now, who is her? Israel. Now, it's important for us to note this is important. This is in the feminine. Sing to her. Israel is actually a vineyard of red wine, or a vineyard of fine wine, right? A vineyard of fine wine. I think you could use that. Something that is excellent, right? It's very desirable. That is what is being discussed, right? It is a vineyard. It is very desirable. And so we're talking about a vineyard that is desirable, a vineyard that produces very good wine. And God is saying, who is this vineyard? And I would say that we should look at the vineyard. Now the picture is about a vineyard, and the vineyard is about Israel. And this vineyard will be producing excellent wine in that day. And God says, I, Jehovah, watches it, keep it, watch it. I think watch it is good. Guard it. I water it every moment, lest any hurt it. I, right, in this way here, I watch, the same word, right? I guard it day and night. Basically, it's telling that the vineyard is protected by God. Remember, we are still dealing with poetic language with regards to the prophecy. It says here, fury is not in me, or I have no wrath. Fury is wrath. It says, I have no wrath. Now, this expression here, we need to reword it. And I think we could say this. If only I were at war with weeds and thorns, I would then trample it and set it on fire. So this translation is required. Okay, so let me just take this. and strike it off. It is important for us to realize God is saying, wrath is not in me. I'm not here trying to do and destroy everything inside. If God says, if I were at war with weeds and thorns, so the picture here is that all these uh, pests, weeds and thorns is not very welcome by the farmer, and so they are pests. They disturb your plants, your vine, right? The vineyard having weeds and thorns, you have to pull them out. So God says, if I were at war with weeds and thorns, this represents nations that is up to no good. I would then trample it and set it on fire. Basically, burn away the weeds and thorns so that it will clear the ground for the vineyard. Our next phrase is this. This one here, or well, I guess we have to retranslate this again. So this one would say this: if Israel would grasp my stronghold, then would he make peace with me. Peace would he make with me. So we need to actually retranslate because the English translation just doesn't quite express it well enough. So God says, if Israel really can hang on to God, uh, and and more importantly, take God as a stronghold, a fort, a walled city, right? We can say that a place of refuge. Then Israel would make peace with me. Peace would he make with me. Basically saying that uh, Israel must recognize God as their fort, their stronghold, their place of refuge. Verse 6. It says, those who come, he shall cause to take root in Jacob. I think we have to retranslate this. It says, days are coming when Jacob will take root. This is to say that the days will come when Jacob, that represents Israel, he will take root as the vineyard into the ground that is designated for her. Israel shall blossom and bud and fill the face of the world with fruit. So this would be a much better way to translate verse 6. And it's to say that in the days to come, Israel shall be one that is well loved, but not right now. Verse 7. Has he struck Israel as he struck those who struck him? Or has he been slain according to the slaughter of those who were slain by him? So let's take a look at this. Verse 7 says, this is about Jacob. Has he struck him? Right? Jacob, right here. Not Israel. Has he struck Jacob as he struck those who are the enemies, who struck Jacob? Did God punish Jacob the same way the nations of the world punished Jacob? The second part here, or has he, now this word is, has Jacob been slain according to the slaying of those of his enemies, or of those slain according to the slaying of, well, we don't need this. Those here would be his enemies. So now we are saying that what has happened to Israel? Was he slain? Was he struck by God? Or was he struck by those who were struck by God? Because Israel is silent. What happened to Israel? Right? What happened to Israel? Verse 8. In measure, by sending it away, you contended with it. He removes it by his rough wind in the day of the east wind. I guess we have to maybe redo this. Let's see how it goes. It says, according to the measure of his sin. This would be Israel. We're talking about Israel. God had contended against her farmland, stripping it with his harsh wind on the day of the east wind. Now, we may not appreciate this, but let me just say that let's take this out of the way first. So it says, God has visited Israel according to the measure of his sin, not because of how the enemies have struck Israel. God will contend against her farmland, which talks about the land of Israel itself, stripping it with his harsh wind on the day of the east wind. Now, this is about the east wind coming and taking over and drying up the land. Now, many of us may not be aware that the east wind is a very harsh wind. And the east wind works this way. If this is the sea, right, the Great Sea, and this is Israel, and then we have Galilee, the Dead Sea, and that's it. Now, what happens is that the east wind comes from this side. This is the east wind. Now, I've been through the east wind, and I could tell this to you. The east wind comes from the desert area on the east of the Jordan. And it doesn't pick up any moisture. It's actually very dry and very hot. As it passes by moisture, it will dry up everything along the way. I remember when I was there once and the east wind really blew, the skin will dry up and crack. Now, that's how harsh the wind was. If the wind is from the west, all right, is from the west, then it picks up moisture and it'll be very wet and strong. So that's the difference between the two. So whenever you talk about the east wind, harsh, hot, dry. West wind, strong, wet. And so God says, I have dried up your land. Therefore, by this, the iniquity of Jacob will be atoned. This word covered is atoned. Right? Covered is atoned. And this, all the fruit of taking away his sin, when he makes all the stones of the altar like chalk stones that are beaten to dust, wooden images and incense altars shall not stand. Now, what does that mean? It is important for us to realize that this is all in an imagery, right? In the imagery. We're talking about the iniquity, the sin of Jacob will be atoned. And how is it? And this is the fruit of removing his sin. The fruit. This is the fruit. This is the consequence. So the atonement or the covering is the consequence of taking away his sin. Jacob's sin, basically. In verse 8, we read about God punishing Jacob on the land and drying it up by the east wind. And then in verse 9 tells us that for this iniquity of Jacob, because of this, the punishment, it will be covered. And at the same time, it is important for Jacob to do one more thing, not just by sheer punishment, but by his actions of removing idolatry from the land, right? From the land. So look at this. He makes all the stones of the idol altar, the Baalim altar, and crush it to dust. All the wooden images that they carve long and tall, and the altars where they burn incense to the idols, they do not stand anymore. And now, when you talk about this, this is important because God wants them to destroy all idolatry before they could be forgiven. Understand that judgment and forgiveness are two very separate things. Atonement and restitution is also very different. All must be done so that the judgment of God is just. Judgment of God cannot just be removed just because he said so. Judgment of God can be removed when it's atoned, when the punishment is meted out, and at the same time when there is repentance, and repentance is shown by destroying all the idols. Verse 10. Yet the fortified city will be desolate, the habitation forsaken, left like a wilderness. The calf will feed, and there it will lie down and consume its branches. When its boughs are withered, they will be broken off. The women come, set them on fire, for it is a people of no understanding. Therefore, he who made them will not have mercy on them, and he who formed them will show them no favor. And what are we talking about here? In verse 10, we are saying that yet the fortified city, and these would be the enemies, everything to do with the enemies is laid to waste. Nobody will stay there. It is left like a desert. So when you look at the desert, that's how the enemy land will be. What else will be there? Only the animals will feed there, will rest there. and eat from the branches. And when the branches are dry, it will wither. They will be broken off. The women will come and burn them. And that's the way that it's done. When it's useless, you bunch them all together and burn off all of it before they catch fire and burn everything else. And God says this: these are a people of no understanding. And he who made them will not have mercy on them. He who formed them will show them no favor. Now, understand this. What does this verse 11 mean? It's quite important when it comes to this. Well, it basically says this: God is not going to have, verse 11, God is not going to have compassion. Right? This word here is compassion. This is racham. The second word here is hanan. Right? This is grace. This is hanan. Favor. Now, this, I guess, we need to understand this whole passage here is compared to the vineyard in verse 2. So the vineyard is Israel. The fortified city is described as the enemy terrain, as an imagery comparison. And God says, he who made them, and because it's God who is the creator, right? We're talking about the creator. God will not have compassion on them. And why? Because they are the ones that has no understanding. Now, the idea of understanding here is they have no discernment. Uh, they cannot have a purposeful knowledge of God. I guess you can say that. And that's why they are depicted as branches that will wither, it will be broken off, it will be set on fire, it will be desolate. And if you take one step back and look at this picture, God is saying that those who do not grasp the knowledge of God to obey him and to follow him, God says he will have no compassion on them, because God would have given them ample opportunity to repent through the fact that they would have learned through Israel that there is one God, right? And so that is something which I think is worth considering, looking at how God protects the vineyard but destroys the enemy. So think of chapter 27 very much as the end days in that day, right? In that day. Verse 12, he says, and it shall come to pass in that day. He's still talking about that day that the Lord will thresh. Now, the idea of thresh, the threshing floor, to beat, right? To beat out. Thrashing, right? Really very much would be you get a bunch of wheat, bunch them together. Now, at the end of the wheat, there will be stalks. And so you bunch them together and you slap them on the ground. And so that the wheat will fall out. And that's threshing, right? That's threshing, to knock out. And it says here, from the channel of the river to the brook of Egypt. Now, the river here, the first one would be Euphrates. And to the brook of Egypt will be the Wadi of Egypt, somewhere just before the Sinai Peninsula. And that you will be gathered one by one, O you children of Israel. So, what does this mean? It means that this is the boundary of the land, of the promised land. And this will be the ingathering. So the imagery is there would be a time of threshing. So if you think of it, there will be some turmoil, there will be some pushing and shoving. The nations will jostle around. But from the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, the people of Israel, the children of Israel, God will bring them back. You'll be gathered one by one. So this is an individual gathering. Now, at this point in time, we already have a number of tribes in the current state of Israel. But verse 12 is talking about one day in the future, there will be the ingathering of the 12 tribes. And so we can read this in Ezekiel chapter 37, where the two nations, the north and south kingdom, will be brought back together. And it says, and so shall it be in that day, so somewhere in the future, the great trumpet will be blown. Now, what is the trumpet? The great shofar. There will be a victory blast. They will come who are about to perish in the land of Assyria, and they who are outcast in the land of Egypt. So we're talking about, from historical viewpoint, they will be from the north and the south. That the Israelites were never comfortable in a land that does not belong to them. You can also see that in World War II, where they appeared to have settled in Europe, and when World War II came and Hitler inducted the Holocaust, then you find that wherever they are never part of that place. So God says they will come back to the land, right? They will come. So verse 13 is that they will come. And the last line is the most important, I guess, as a conclusion. And they shall worship the Lord in the holy mountain at Jerusalem. Now, again, I want to point out to you there is no word called worship. Now, this word is, I guess, let me just put it down. It's Hishta Chavu. And it is to cause oneself to prostrate. So you see this imagery would be a person is on the ground, and that would be this would be an imagery of humility. It is nevertheless an oriental expression of obeisance, but this word translated as worship typically is from this word hishtachavu, is to cause oneself to bow down, face to the ground, body to the ground, and is to God in the holy mount at Jerusalem. Now, the holy mount at Jerusalem would be Mount Zion, But these are synonyms: Jerusalem, Mount Zion. And what is there to bow down? The temple. The temple is always seen also as a mount. That's why in all idol worship, they build a big giant pyramid of a temple. But the temple of God, as instructed to Solomon and however they have built it, never looked like any of the pagan temples at all. Now, the Israelites will come back to the land. There will be the great shofar being blown, and they will come back and pay homage to God, who is in the holy mountain at Jerusalem. And it is important for us then to go back and read Ezekiel 37. Now, Ezekiel 37 itself talks about God bringing the northern tribes and the southern tribe back together again under one shepherd. Now, what we also see in Isaiah chapter 2 is that they will stream up to the mountain of God, and God is there to be consulted. Right? It is important for us to see this. Now, with this, chapter 27, we see it as a prophecy in some imagery to look at how God cares for Israel from exile to bring them back and to bring everyone. Now, we say every one by one, we're talking about the faithful ones, the remnants, right? Not every single tribe. Just because they are by tribe in existence doesn't make them faithful to God. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.